Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Christmas Evil, or You Better Watch Out, from 1980. Christmas Evil is kind of unique in the kind of killer slasher Santa Claus genre movie thing or whatever, in that it was actually made and financed because of the success of Friday the 13th and Halloween, and even says both of those titles in one of the posters, which I think was a VHS or something like that. This is very much made because of that success and having, you know, a horror movie for every holiday you possibly could. But it doesn't really play like a typical slasher film of the genre, or like a Friday the 13th does, or like the more famous kind of, well, I guess it's not famous, but it's the one most people know, Silent Night, Deadly Night, plays more as a typical genre slasher film, just, you know, with Santa Claus and stuff. Christmas Evil kind of is its own thing. Now, that's mostly because this film was developed for 10 years before this movie actually got made by its director, who had wanted to make this film since after getting really high off marijuana in 1970, I believe, and thought of Santa Claus with a knife and came up with this idea. There had been Christmas horror movies before Black Christmas, which was before even Halloween itself, and I think apart from a Tales from the Crypt movie. But this was kind of the first of the slasher era, although it is not really typical of the, or has anything to do with the slasher genre. It's a little more sympathetic. It's both sort of pro Santa Claus while also sort of messing with the iconography of it. It has a much more sympathetic Santa Claus killer person than you're usually used to, particularly in this era, having like the idea of the Shape or Jason or this mindless kind of killer. But it kind of goes into various things that are like a kind of like a genre kind of psycho kind of killer kind of thing, but almost cares more about like the emotional state of its protagonist more than fulfilling even things that the movie builds up, which is bad construction. But it's like you almost see his existential breakdown as he goes and kills people as Santa Claus, but also gives children presents. Like, he believes in the idea of Santa Claus, but he has also been so tormented by the idea of Santa Claus he's going to kill people. It's actually much more of a complex idea of this character than you really expect. Really kind of a different slasher kind of a thing. I find it interesting, the reception of this film. Now, John Waters is a huge fan of this, and the way this film is made and shot and the ideas within it very much feels like something that Waters himself would make. I know he's always wanted to make a Christmas movie, and he never has, but he considers this to be the greatest Christmas film of all time. I don't know if I agree with that. And he actually did a commentary with the director on the recent DVD, which is really cool of him to do that, because he's one of the reasons this film, which didn't really get a good release, barely got released at all, and seems to, because of re-releases, is probably more known and more seen now than it was in 1980. This really wasn't very well seen, but I think one of the things about this film that has made it more of a kind of cinephile kind of movie than like really a kind of horror fan movie, or even a typical horror fan at the time type of movie, is that there aren't a lot of kills. This film doesn't make a lot of sense. It is a little strange and weird and odd, so it kind of plays more into the cult fan base more than the horror fan base. The director mentioned how most people didn't like when this film would get weird or surreal. This was sort of the end of Grindhouse in 1980. Weren't really as into that, and I can kind of see why this film is just sort of like a weird oddball of a movie. And Christmas horror movies are kind of like a really weird subgenre, but this is kind of one of the stranger, more unique ones in a genre that kind of wants to be stranger and unique in itself, but this one kind of plays on its own rules, on its own wavelength, before the slasher genre rules could be set. Even though this was developed so long before there were slasher genre rules, it wouldn't have mattered anyway. But a young boy in suburban New Jersey on Christmas Eve in 1947 witnesses his parents basically just touching each other sexually as his dad's dressed as Santa, as we go to 33 years later as he is an adult who works in a toy factory and isn't really liking as he's been promoted to upper management, and has a breakdown at work and decides he's going to go off and kill people as Santa while also helping out the children and making sure children get toys as well, as he goes on kind of both a killing spree but also kind of a wonderful thing where he gives children toys, which he mostly steals from people and his employer, and spreads joy while also stabbing people in the face, which is always cool. I think with Silent Night, Deadly Night was kind of the one actual real controversial big, protest kind of Christmas horror movie. This movie never got there. That might be because it was banned for obscenity in England. They were going to put out more ads in newspapers, which this was 1980, so that mattered a lot more. So they were going to do a lot of newspaper ads, but unfortunately the MPAA would not approve the poster, which they actually have a jurisdiction over that for some reason. So this could not be the controversial thing because the MPAA kind of stopped it basically, and it couldn't get a lot of advertising because it was using these iconography of Christmas in a horror film. So they actually stopped it 4 years before the Silent Night, Deadly Night thing all blew up and was a controversial thing. Christmas Evil was kind of swatted down from ever even kind of getting close to something like that at all happening. Just sort of interesting that before they had the foresight to know that would be a problem, and then 4 years later it actually became a problem. But I think a lot of what works about this film is Brandon Maggert, who was nominated for a Tony. He's very much a character actor. It's also Fiona Apple's dad. I didn't know she had like an acting lineage or anything like that. But he isn't your typical horror movie protagonist. He is sympathetic. You do kind of want to follow him and kind of side with him in a little bit of ways. But it's also sort of disturbing because he's having an absolute mental breakdown. You can tell that things are not working out for him currently, and this kind of Santa Claus thing is a way for him to deal with that. Now it's also complex because you think like why he had this traumatic event where he saw his parents basically like sort of touching each other, mainly the Santa Claus dad touching the mom. This part does very much go into the whole genre of slasher films, but I love the idea of someone witnesses their parents having sex and then they're going to grow up and go on a murder spree because of it. And it's like, eventually you get older and be like, I don't know, my parents were probably like horny or something. It was Christmas and it was a little really stressful and I don't know, who cares, whatever. But I guess maybe it was the 80s and none of the protagonists of slasher movies are that easygoing. I mean, if it was like really weird sex or something, they needed to make it like something where I was like, whoa, that freaks me out. And there was a kid who saw that, so that kid's probably like all like, what? And then this you're like, I mean, yeah, I don't know, it's like she's into Santa or something. I mean, it's a little weird, but especially because it looked like the kids were still up, so like maybe like you could have waited or not done it in the living room. Without the portrayal of Harry, who Brandon Maggert plays, you kind of end up following more of him than you do anybody else. In most slasher films, you're following someone else hunting the slasher, a police officer, somebody or something, trying to stop this from happening. But in this, you're more following him. You sort of get parts with his brother, but nobody's really going after him. You're just seeing his pursuit. You're seeing it from his perspective, and he's a good enough of an actor to get this to work for him. It's kind of cool having a good character actor lead a horror film because they almost both understand exactly the kind of film they're making, but they also understand how to make it a lot more than your typical kind of slasher film is really going to cast them as. I think Lewis Jackson, who directed this film, was really smart about doing that. It almost definitely feels like a film more in the Psycho vein than in the slasher kind of post-Halloween, post-Friday the 13th vein. And I think he does a really good job with that. I like the kind of surreal imagery. This film just gets weirder and weirder. I like that he drives around in a van, a windowless van, which is super weird and creepy, but drew a sleigh spray painted on it. I like elements like that. I like that both this and Silent Night, Deadly Night have an environment specificity. This takes place in New Jersey and very much in the shadow of New York, which I like that that's going on within it. I like that they really give it a real location, but there are a lot of plot elements, particularly that he is shown to kind of be observing or watching these children very much in a really creepy way, sometimes with binoculars, and that doesn't really go anywhere. It's kind of like things to set up this whole idea that even his life is very much a Santa Claus thing. He works at a toy factory. There's this one little girl he fixates on, which is super creepy, but there's a little boy who like keeps like, he views him like going through a Penthouse magazine, and then later on he was like, oh, what are you getting for Christmas, little kids? You know, he's walking by, it's just their neighbor, and they list the things. It's all cute, and one kid's like, I want Penthouse magazine, which was really funny. Very like John Watersy. I can totally see why he likes this. I like how this film is also shot. I think it has a real like kind of grimy, dirty feel to it. I heard the new Blu-ray is great and everything, and it's restored and it's wonderful, but I like my gritty, shitty copy, and that's how I viewed it. But oftentimes I noticed they really go for real expressive quality in the cinematography, and this is much better shot than it has any right to be, but almost like in a really fun, alive way. They kind of highlight kind of the strangeness of this whole thing, but also give it a sense of normalcy, which is interesting. Another plot line they kind of totally drop is the thing where he's going to go after his bosses and take them down, and he ends up taking down completely different people. Who is mainly the main kills in this film are characters who you don't know. They just kind of like get in the way, and he kills them and lets that go. And then once he kills people, the film starts getting weirder. They even do a Santa hideout at the police station, which is pretty funny. I mean, this film both understands the ridiculousness of it, but also takes its protagonist seriously, which is a line that this film is very good at walking, frankly. I don't think this is really part of the slasher genre. This isn't really that. The director almost looked at it as sort of a monster movie like Frankenstein or something like that. And it is kind of the very sympathetic kind of follow the monster type of movie, basically. But I actually quite like this. I would probably see this again a different Christmas. Silent Night, Deadly Night, I think, is more of the fun of seeing like a cool slasher movie and someone's dressed as Santa Claus, all that crap. Christmas Evil gets you in more. I don't think the plot works and the story works at all. It kind of like builds the things that don't matter, but it builds the character correctly. I think the character arc works perfectly in this kind of weird, kind of strange way. It has a definite like development to it and a kind of creepy, crazy arc. Like that part works. It's just everything that's building around it makes like literally no sense, but almost sort of like hits all those beats in a way that you're like, yeah, you know, this is fine. And it like, there are a couple of the things that didn't make sense that later I was like, oh right, they just like dropped that, you know, and oh right, they had like kind of cop characters who were like barely in this for a few scenes for some reason. They had certain things that didn't make entirely a lot of sense. They have like the whole idea of him and his brother. You'd think he'd bring up the thing with his mom and dad and the Santa Claus thing, but it seems to be more that his brother didn't believe in Santa Claus was a problem. It's just like things like that that like don't really make a lot of sense, but like as you go through the movie, the through line that character does, which is kind of odd and interesting. I like Christmas Evil or You Better Watch Out, which originally was going to be called You Better Watch Out, which I guess is a better title, but I kind of like Christmas Evil, and that seems to be the main title this film is known as. I like it for its kind of odd, kind of cult movie-ish thing. It's a shame this film didn't get aired on TV a lot, barely got released on video, wasn't really well known until recently, where mostly because of the support of John Waters, but also from other people, that this film has actually been able to get a decent release and getting shown more and more. And I think it falls into kind of one of those cinematic finds that more cinephiles like than anyone else. If you're going to see a Christmas horror movie for the kills or for the, you know, reaction to people being like, oh, you know, you like Hallmark Christmas movies, well, I saw Christmas Evil. Like, nobody's gonna care. Nobody cares anyway, but if you're going more for that, see Silent Night, Deadly Night, see more of that stuff. Christmas Evil is for cinephiles who you'll tell them like, it's like Santa Claus is a killer, but you want to follow him, but he's also a good Santa Claus at the same time. It's almost more about the mental breakdown of a guy who goes around as Santa Claus, really, and does a lot of good, but also does, you know, more bad by stabbing people in the eye and stuff. Spoilers. I would recommend Christmas Evil if what I just described sounds like something cool for you, but I wouldn't see this if you're more of a horror fan and you're looking for more of the kind of like the cheap beer quality that most horror movies have. This isn't really necessarily for that. Christmas Evil might be like the ultimate like Christmas holiday breakdown kind of existential crisis sort of movie, and it might be the strangest at that, and it's definitely one I think I would probably enjoy to watch another Christmas as well, mainly because of the wonderful acting by Brendan Maggert and how they're able to make this film probably a little more complex and interesting than maybe it had any right to be, and also make this stranger and stupider than it had any right. Well, I guess it had the right to be those things. If you're ready for just kind of a strange little odd Christmas horror movie, this might be the oddest and strangest and most interesting one I've seen to date, and definitely one I will be thinking about, and thinking about everything it did way more than just the surface level idea of seeing a Christmas horror movie and how fucked up it is. I think this movie is just fucked up enough for you to appreciate them doing something different with this weird little subgenre. So if you have seen Christmas Evil and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.